Human beings like to believe they are the peak of evolutionary sophistication, yet we routinely spend thousands of dollars on therapy because we lack the basic vocabulary to explain why a minor rainstorm makes us want to quit our jobs and move to the woods. We assume our internal experience is universal. We assume that a human brain in New York, Tokyo, or a remote village in the Amazon rainforest processes joy, anger, and grief in the exact same way. This comforting assumption was largely promoted in the 1970s by psychologists who claimed that human facial expressions are universal biological indicators. They argued that a smile indicates happiness everywhere. But this clean, corporate-friendly theory ignored a massive, inconvenient reality. Different cultures possess highly specific, untranslatable words for distinct emotional states that other populations cannot even begin to articulate. Consider the German word Schadenfreude, which describes the pleasure derived from another person's misfortune, or the Japanese concept of amae, which denotes a state of temporary childlike dependence on another person's benevolence. In English, we try to translate these with clumsy, multi-word sentences, but the raw speed and precision of a single dedicated word are completely lost. This is not just a quirky trivia fact for language studies. It points to a profound cognitive crisis. If your language does not have a word for a specific feeling, does that mean your brain is physically incapable of experiencing it, or are you simply wandering through life emotionally limited? In the mid-1980s, a highly controversial experiment involving isolated tribes and visual stimuli revealed a shocking truth about how vocabulary physically rewires the human brain. This experiment proved that our words do not just describe the world, they actively construct the reality we see and feel. The delayed resolution of this linguistic mystery reveals a dark truth about our emotional limitations. To understand how words dictate our feelings, we must first look at the academic debate of linguistic relativity. For decades, the dominant theory was the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which argued that the structure of a language determines how its speakers perceive the world. The history of this theory is a prime example of scientific irony. One of its main architects, Benjamin Lee Whorf, was not even a trained academic. He was a chemical engineer and fire prevention inspector who investigated insurance claims for a living. Whorf spent his free time analyzing indigenous languages and concluded that because the Hopi language has no grammatical tenses for past, present, and future, the Hopi people literally lived in a timeless universe. Academic linguists immediately revolted against this idea. They argued that the human brain operates with a universal code, and language is merely the output mechanism. They asserted that a lack of a word does not mean a lack of a concept. For a long time, the universalists won the debate. They claimed that human emotions are innate biological responses, pre-programmed into our DNA since the Stone Age. According to this view, an ancient hunter-gatherer and a modern stockbroker experience the exact same neurochemical spikes. But this mechanical view of the human mind began to crumble when researchers looked closer at how the brain actually processes sensory information. They discovered that the brain is not a passive recorder of external facts. It is an active interpreter that relies heavily on cognitive shortcuts. Words are not just labels we slap onto pre-existing feelings after they happen. Instead, words act as vital cognitive reference points. They allow the brain to group chaotic physiological signals into neat, actionable packages. Without these reference points, our internal states remain a chaotic, confusing collection of biological signals that we struggle to navigate. This brings us to the modern revolution in cognitive science, spearheaded by the theory of constructed emotion. This theory completely dismantles the old idea that emotions are triggered by dedicated circuits in the brain. The brain does not possess a specific button for fear or a physical compartment for sadness. Instead, the brain is a predictive organ. It constantly monitors your internal bodily functions, such as your heart rate, cortisol levels, and body temperature. At the same time, it receives a constant barrage of external sensory data from the outside world. To make sense of this overwhelming chaos, the brain must make a prediction based on your past experiences, and crucially, your cultural concepts. If you feel your heart racing and your chest tightening, your brain searches its database of concepts to categorize the sensation. If you are standing at the edge of a cliff, your brain uses the concept of fear to construct the emotion. If you are waiting for a job interview, it constructs anxiety. But what happens when your culture has spent centuries refining concepts that do not exist in other parts of the world? Consider the Baining people of Papua New Guinea. They use the word awumbuk to describe the heavy, listless, and empty feeling that lingers in a house after guests leave. In Western societies, we might experience the state and mistake it for fatigue, depression, or mild boredom. We might take an aspirin or scroll on our phones to distract ourselves. The Baining, however, recognize a wumbuk as a distinct temporary social state with its own set of cultural rituals to resolve it. Because they have a specific word, their brains categorize the physiological sensation instantly, allowing them to process it and move on. The lack of a word leaves the physical body stuck in unresolved autonomic arousal, searching for a label that does not exist. The physical reality of this cognitive filtering was finally proven by the landmark linguistic experiments we hinted at earlier. Researchers wanted to know if language could actually change basic sensory perception. They tested native Russian speakers against native English speakers using various shades of the color blue. In English, we use the single word blue for both light and dark shades. Russian, however, has no single word for blue. It forces its speakers to distinguish between goluboy for light blue and sini for dark blue. The experimenters placed subjects in front of a screen displaying 3 blocks of color and measured their reaction times. The results were undeniable. The Russian speakers categorized the shades of blue significantly faster than the English speakers. More importantly, brain scans showed distinct neural spikes in the Russian brains at the exact moment the color shifted across the linguistic boundary. Their brains were physically registering a difference that English brains ignored. This cognitive phenomenon occurs automatically. This is the resolution of our mystery. If language can alter the literal speed of visual processing in the brain, it holds absolute power over our internal emotional chemistry. When a Japanese speaker experiences amai, or a Czech speaker experiences litos, a complex mixture of grief, sympathy, and self-pity, their brains are not just translating a feeling. They are executing a highly specialized neural process. They recognize, categorize, and resolve the physical state with lightning speed. Meanwhile, a speaker of a language without these terms is left with a vague, nameless agitation. They feel the physical symptoms of the emotion, but because they lack the linguistic category, their brain cannot resolve the prediction loop. They are trapped in an unlabeled physiological state, unable to diagnose their own internal discomfort. This emotional confusion has massive economic and cultural consequences. In modern Western societies, language has been systematically streamlined for industrial efficiency and workplace productivity. We have successfully invented and popularized words like burnout, stress, and synergy because they directly relate to economic output. We understand exactly what it means to be burnt out because it threatens our ability to generate corporate revenue. However, we have largely discarded the nuanced vocabulary required to navigate our complex, non-productive internal states. To compensate for this linguistic poverty, we have turned to raw consumerism. We import trendy foreign concepts like the Danish hygge or the Japanese ikigai and package them into lifestyle books, scented candles, and overpriced self-help seminars. We desperately try to buy the emotional states we are too linguistically impoverished to construct ourselves. We treat these foreign words as exotic souvenirs, hoping that adding them to our vocabulary will magically cure our deep existential dread. But the final cynical irony of our quest for emotional vocabulary is that we are trying to solve a systemic problem with individual purchases. We search for rare words from remote cultures to describe our alienation, refusing to acknowledge that our own economic structure is what stripped those words from our daily lives in the first place. This behavior represents a bizarre attempt to purchase psychological balance. In the end, we remain restricted by our limited linguistic options, feeling everything, understanding very little, and paying hundreds of dollars an hour for a therapist to help us translate the silent, nameless panic of our own hyper-efficient lives. Our brains remain limited by our vocabulary, proving that we can only feel as deeply as our dictionary allows.